back from recess. I do want to say that when we left off the day before yesterday, Senator Mike Nicholas did have the floor. So at this time, I will go ahead and address Senator Mike Nicholas, and then the only other speaker on the amendment for Senator Rodriguez's amendment is Speaker Juan Pat. That's noted here. So, Senator Nicholas, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the amendment, I did have a few questions I wanted to run by the management of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority.
That's right. If the Sergeant of Arms can send in the government officials at this time. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask the Sergeant of Arms to go ahead and swear in the administration from the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. And before we yield to Senator Nicholas, can I go ahead and have you folks who are new to introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Rose Sabala from the Department of Public Health and Social Services.
Ms. Zavala. Senator Mike Nicholas, you're recognized on the Rodriguez amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to extend my thanks to the Oversight Chairman, Senator Rodriguez, for having an oversight hearing on GMH later on this afternoon. We'll go ahead and reserve a lot of other questions for that period. I would also like to thank the GMH management for making the time to come down today. I just had one very big concern that I wanted to kind of run by you guys and figure out whether we got the green light or not as far as you're concerned. The bill is going to be taking money from the Health Security Trust Fund, which is basically the GMH Trust Fund. It's one of the only remaining pools of money that's entirely for you guys. It's going to take it from that trust fund, stick it into Medicaid, get Medicaid matching funds, of which we know 2.7 million is going to come right back to you guys in the forms of bill reconciliations. But there's still some remaining outstanding unsettled amounts that are still pending. And so I wanted to get clearance from you. Are you guys okay with tapping your trust fund for this purpose? Because, you know, I really think that there might be better uses. Maybe you can invest it in other ways, maybe in consultation with GITA. This trust fund does produce a residual income regularly for the hospital. So, you know, going forward, I want to make absolutely certain that you guys, I mean, you know what we're doing. You know, we're tapping your trust fund for Medicaid. So if you can help clarify for me.
And I appreciate, Senator, you raising that issue. I will make a first comment and let Alan comment. Regarding this trust fund, I believe this trust fund has been around since 2001, correct? And I'm not sure exactly how much residual revenue that we're actually getting from it. Actually, to tell you the truth, we never really knew how much we were getting, or the fact that it even existed. So the fact that it even existed was really news to us, and which we were delighted to hear how much we had in the trust fund to use. You know, another question that I wanted to raise is, I understand from the discussions yesterday that the talk was to leave another $865,000 or thereabouts in the trust fund, which was I believe interest on the trust fund. And after discussion with Alan, you know, one of our thoughts was why even leave that there? If we're going to use the whole thing, and at least those funds can come to GMH now. We definitely need them. So from my perspective, I mean, yes, I am. We are okay with using that because the hospital needs these funds, very much right now, to pay those outstanding invoices for our services, at least through June. So with that, I'll let Alan comment on his thoughts.
Thank you, Senator. As Joe mentioned, we weren't aware that these funds, this trust fund, if you will, existed. But certainly, first of all, public health will be able to get the federal match, so that's basically doubling the money, which is helpful. And if those funds can be used in the current fiscal period to pay GMH for outstanding claims, that's very positive. And as Joe mentioned, the conversation from on Monday afternoon was that we have close to $8.9 million. And if there are funds that are still remaining after you take the corpus out, if you will, if it's worthwhile to include that in an amendment to actually take all the monies out that are due GMH and have them doubled in order to maximize the benefit and the funds available for GMH. Thank you.
Well, there's a couple things that I'm considering. That was one of them, but the other one was, you know, if we're going to take $5.5 million out of your trust fund, stick it into Medicaid to get a match, I would like the entire $5.5 million and the entire match to be earmarked specifically for GMH. I mean, that's GMH's money. It should all go back to GMH, and if we can somehow MacGyver a 100% return on the investment and get it right back to you, that'll double up the value. Versus right now, I think the way the proposal will work is we're going to take $5.5 million out of your trust fund. It's going to go into Medicaid, but then it's going to be up to public health to disperse the Medicaid priorities, of which $2.7 million is going to be earmarked for the hospital, but then everything else is going to be paid as well outside of GMH. And then how much money is going to be left over specifically for GMH. So I was actually having my team working on an amendment mock-up that was going to basically say $5.5 million from the GMH trust fund into Medicaid, matched, and earmarked specifically only for the hospital.
Senator, we would wholeheartedly support that amendment. As it stands now, I understand that GMH has been taken out of the, specifically out of the proposed legislation, and our concern was exactly that the funds would go to public health, but there was no guarantee really of what GMH was going to receive. So you hit the nail right on the head. We would certainly wholeheartedly support that type of an amendment because the funds are, like I said, outstanding for services provided that are very badly needed. Alan?
Senator Sinicus.
Okay, Madam Chair, so what I'd like to do at this time is go ahead and yield to my colleagues, and then after everyone's kind of done having their questions to GMH, if I could request a recess so that I can confer with the chair and draft that amendment and see if everybody's going to be okay with that. So I'll go ahead and yield at this time.
Okay. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and recognize Speaker Wampat, who has a couple of amendments, and then we'll go ahead and entertain Senator Siniclus's amendment to the amendment. Speaker
Thank you very much,
Wampat.
Madam Chair. The first amendment was something that we had discussed day before yesterday, and what that is an evaluation of these two new programs that are included to receive a total of about $1 million. What it is that, and I'll just read it to everyone, and it'll be a new subsection C. It says, the Non-Communicable Diseases Consortium under the Bureau of Community Health Services shall conduct an evaluation as to the effect of the programs funded by subsections 2 and 3 of Section 2A of this Act on the health and wellness of Medicaid recipients and on the healthy behavior and wise use of the health care system of Medicaid recipients. The consortium shall submit its evaluation and report to the Guam Legislature by July 1st of each year. The Bureau of Healthcare Financing shall also submit an evaluation as to the financial impact of the programs, and it will be the same for the Medicaid program. I had Mr. Gillum read this amendment, and he was okay with it. He also took it out to the group for the two programs that are going to be the recipient of the $700,000, which is the Getting Guam Healthy Incentive Program, and then the other is the Health and Wellness Physical Activity Program of $300,000. So both programs then, who are going to be recipients of these monies, shall then conduct an evaluation of the success of the program, providing more data. And the reason for this is that based on their success, of course, will determine whether more funds, whether it's local funds or even federal dollars could be made available to these two new programs. So that is my amendment, which is just an evaluation for both programs.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I just need for clarification's sake, because we've made some previous amendments the other day, and you were citing some new sections. So for the record, would that be item C? I don't have a copy of the amendment in front of me, so.
You're right. It is, the way it was
Would
written,
be item C.
it's, yes, subsection C to section 2.
Two. So if I can have the clerk get me a copy of the amended version to date, and we'll go ahead and add that as C.
And it actually included as well the discussion earlier about Medicaid recipients, because that
Yeah.
was one of the amendments. So that's the very first one. Any discussion?
On that amendment to the main amendment, are there anyone wishing to speak on it? We thought we were going to save a tree. We're going to go ahead and take a moment's recess to have copies circulated. Frank, you said we were going to save a tree? This legislature is back from recess. Does everybody have a copy of Speaker Wampat's amendment, First Amendment? I'm going to ask Speaker Wampat if she can at least clarify so that we
Yes.
can make sure that the amendment is put into the proper sections.
Yes, thank you.
Based on the amendment, the Senator Rodriguez amendment that we're working on right now, Madam Speaker.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. And yes, if you follow with me, the first line, add a new sub-item. And so it won't be C, it would be A parenthesis 1, a small one. So it won't say subsection C, it should say sub-item A parenthesis 1. That's the very first change to fall in line with the amendment that Senator Rodriguez has. So that's the first correction. Then when you go to C, where it says the non-communicable diseases, that will change to A, small a. So those are just the changes in terms of aligning it with the amendment, and it would be, and legal counsel then will be able to put it in the proper section. And then the other, because of it being sub-item A1, then to go along with this is that for the clerks then to be able to then renumber the sub-items.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On that amendment, are there anyone wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections to the motion? The amendment? No objections. Motion carries. Madam Speaker, you have another amendment.
Yes, I do. Thank you again. The new amendment is based on a discussion that we had on the first day, in which Mr. Carlson had in the questioning had given the exact dollar amount that's in the 3 accounts, and it's, when you round it off, of course, come up to 8.9, but it's really 8,895,813.77. So the amendment that I would like to proffer is that it would say that the difference of, which is the balance of 800, the sum of $895,813.77, and any interest accrued as of July 1st, 2014 forward is hereby, I don't know if this should be the right word, allocated or appropriated to the Guam Memorial Hospital to specifically fund the renovation of the OB maternity ward. The Guam Memorial Hospital shall submit a detailed report to Maga'lahen, Guahan, and to Liheslaturan, Guahan, regarding the expenditure of said funds. So in essence, Madam Chair, and as this previous speaker had said, is that, might as well really, and even was suggested by the panel that you have there, that if we were going to go and take then the 8 million, why leave the residual amounts? And if it's going to benefit, and this is for the hospital as well, and not just public health, for the hospital and our Medicaid, our patients as well, that it makes sense is to take the balance and appropriate it to the hospital. But specifically for OB maternity ward, I know this has been a real strong issue with the doctors, and every one of us can appreciate that, so I hope that you'll be able to support this. And this is proffered not just by myself, but the mothers of this legislature, so Senator Munya Barnes and Senator Lee Yamashita.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate the amendment to that, but my colleagues would like to get a copy, and I'm going to go ahead and just ask them, ask the Sergeant of Arms to please make a copy, get it circulated. But on that, I'm going to go ahead and proceed. If there anyone wishing to speak on that, Senator Mike Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to voice my support for the amendment that Madam Speaker is proposing. I understand, and GMH can chime in if I'm incorrect here, but The maternity ward is a profit center for the hospital. It's one of the areas where the hospital actually makes a decent amount of revenue. And so for us to be able to take from this trust fund and invest in the maternity ward is an actual investment in the improvement of a profit center at the hospital. So this is something that I can totally get behind, and I thank the speaker for the amendment, and I hope that we can all get behind it and pass this.
Thank you, Senator St. Nicholas. Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I too stand in full support of Madam Speaker's motion here, amendment. Certainly, we had all been at the hospital with some of the doctors. Dr. Shea invited us, and we did a review, a visit of the labor, delivery, recovery, postpartum 2 sections. We do know that it'll cost $5 million to get it to where we want it to get. That's $2 to Madam Speaker, by the way. Oh, 5 now?
It's 5.
Oh, 5 now, so sorry. While $5 million is what we're all trying to find where we can get that to bring this particular unit up to speed, it has been 25, 30 years since the beds, the linoleum, the equipment, the toilets, and you know, and I suggest we still deliver our 250 babies a year. A month, right? A month, because we have good doctors and we have families who are very excited about it. So they make it work, and the nurses are grand, so they all make it work. But certainly, when we went up there, we saw that it is time. And so this is a very good step in the right direction. It's good seed money, and we know that everyone's trying to find out where we can get the remaining over $4 million that is needed to do this the right way. So I stand in full support of this step. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Benpubetsu, Senator Yamashita. On the Speaker's amendment, if there anyone wishing to speak, Senator Frank Uggan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to also endorse this particular appropriation. But let me just ask a question to the GMH officials. Now, you're looking at $895,000 being allocated specifically for the maternity ward without any plans in terms of before you. I know you've had some conceptual ideas. How would you apply $895,000 for the renovation of the maternity ward?
Mr. Berga?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Your question is somewhat of a complex one at this time. Is 800 and some odd thousand enough to renovate the entire ward? No, but it will go a long way to at least develop us developing a chunk of applying a chunk of that money to developing those plans. At least if we know we have that money, we can at least start to come up with a plan to use that money to say what would, to show what it would develop. But at this time, as you know, we don't have any specific plans or drawings or designs. We have estimates of $3 to $5 million to renovate the ward exactly the way we want to, and trying to be as cost effective as possible. I think it's certainly more than possible and absolutely feasible for us to come up with a plan to use those funds adequately to meet the basic, the priority needs of that design.
Senator Uggan?
Thank you very much for that response. It tells me that, first of all, foremost, based on previous discussions, yes, conceptually you've had an idea in terms of what the renovation would incorporate, because you're talking about the maternity ward. You're talking about, or we are discussing the labor delivery, and then we're also discussing the recovery component. That's the entire facility. Now, $895,000, I know that a physician had mentioned that it could conceivably cost about anywhere from $4 to $5 million. And if the A&E, the architecture and engineering design, would cost approximately 10% of that, then $500,000 would be appropriate in terms of preparing the conceptual design. So I guess my follow-on question is, in addition to preparing that design, wouldn't it be also prudent to consider renovation and the procurement of necessary or critical equipment? And I say this because not too long ago, a good number of our colleagues, my colleagues here in the legislature, by virtue of an invitation extended by a physician, and also yourselves were present during a tour of that facility. Realistically, there were a few equipments that were identified specifically and that were quite outdated and that needed to be replaced. So my question, again, my follow-on question is, I hope you understand where I'm coming from with this. $895,000 by virtue of this amendment, by virtue of this legislation, would be directed to GMH for the maternity ward requirements. So if you're able to finalize the conceptual design, it's going to cost 10% of the overall projected cost for the renovation of the maternity ward, approximately anywhere from 40 to 50,000. And that's just, 400 to 500,000. That's just my general number that I'm throwing out. Then perhaps the remaining balance, which is hard cash, would be going to GMH, could be utilized for perhaps a procurement of necessary maternity ward equipment so that all of the mothers and the children, the infants that are born, all of the mothers, they can be accommodated with the best safe environment with the appropriate equipment. So that's more or less my question to you is, would you consider, and Madam Speaker, I know that this is your amendment, and this question, I guess, indirectly would be applied in your direction too, Madam Speaker, is that would you consider that another aspect of much needed concern in terms of being able to get an updated equipment for the maternity ward?
Mr. Verga or GMH?
Senator, in response to your question, the answer is absolutely. I mean, as part of the renovation, we would certainly need to consider outdated equipment, because we do have much outdated equipment at the hospital that has not been replaced for years. We continue to keep them updated, but much of it has lived past its normal life. So as part of the renovation, we certainly need to consider equipment. To give you an analogy, the renovation of the emergency department, okay, which is around 14,000 square feet, adding the pharmacy, approximately another 15,000 square feet, cost us $7.5 million. So when you use the same numbers proportionately and do a breakdown and that includes equipment. So when you do a breakdown proportionately, you can come up with a total number which includes both the renovation and equipment of the renovation of that area, and it's a very similar comparison. So the answer to your question is absolutely, it needs to be considered in the totality of the renovation.
Senator Frank Ogden?
Thank you very much again for that particular response, and I certainly appreciate it, because having seen some of the equipment and your professionals, your nursing professionals, as well as the physicians work with outdated equipment, I think it would only make sense that, in fact, any remaining balance of the $895,000 that is not applied towards the conceptual design for the renovation of the maternity ward, rather than sitting in an account, sitting in a bank for perhaps an additional year or 2 years, real hard cash should be applied towards perhaps procuring updated equipment for the maternity ward itself. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to present that as a thought, because obviously if the estimate was anywhere from $4 to $5 million for renovation for the labor and delivery room and the maternity ward, then conceivably you would utilize, or the A&E cost may be anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000 with the remaining balance available to GMH to possibly apply elsewhere. So I just wanted to leave that thought with you, Madam Speaker, as the proffer of the amendment. Thank you very much for your response.
Thank you, Senator Ogden. Senator Mike Limchak, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Verga, Helen, it seems as though we're kind of going backwards. We're getting amendments thrown at you saying, hey, you spend the money here for this particular amendment. They're allocating a certain amount of money. And I'm wondering whether or not it should be going the other way around. Where is this money needed in the hospital? Where do you need to spend the money so that we can make the appropriate appropriation to that particular area? I understand there was some equipment that was recently donated that we're unable to take advantage of because there's a lack of funds potentially to implement or install this equipment. Could that money be used in that area? So I guess my question to you is, if you had a priority list of where this money would go, where should it go? Where would it benefit the hospital the most so that we can get some direction as to maybe we need to reconsider the amendment and direct the money appropriated in a different direction based on the priorities of the hospital as it stands now. So if you were to prioritize that, what would be the first thing that comes to your mind as to where this money should be spent?
Mr. Verga?
Thank you, Senator Limpiaco, for your question. And Senator, the answer to your question, as you know, is GMH has many needs, many capital needs, many renovation needs. Much of our infrastructure has not been renovated, replaced, upgraded in a long time. And we do have a pretty long laundry list of priorities. So all the things that we're talking about here today are among our priorities and certainly consistent with the hospital's priorities. So I'm perfectly comfortable with utilizing the funds that we're talking about in the manner in which we're talking about today. I mean, do we have other needs? Yes, we do have other needs. That we need to discuss and discuss where funding will come from for those needs as well. So, the answer is yes, there is a list of prioritization of capital needs for the hospital, but what we're talking about today, certainly, the renovation of a unit with outdated equipment is very much needed, just as much as our ED was very much in need of renovation and updating. So I'm perfectly comfortable with the discussion in the amendments to this bill directing us to use the funds in the manner in which we're going to use it. But you're absolutely right. There are certainly other needs that we would certainly be happy to provide you with a list of, and we could discuss further.
Thank you. Senator Limpiaco?
So this would be the priority then? Is that what you're saying, that this use of funds would be at the top of your list?
It would be among the top of my list. If you're asking for the number one and the number two and number three, I don't look at priorities as, I look in terms of, you heard Senator St. Nicholas mention a return on investment. So this is actually going to, some needs, Senator, are not really looked at in terms of return on investment. Like, for example, replacing the electrical panels on our hospital, which needs to keep the lights on in the entire place, but isn't a direct correlation to bringing in revenue. So if I looked at utilizing money right now and directing it to a place where I can develop a service to bring in more revenue to help the hospital, yes, this is among the top priorities.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Limpiaco. Senator Chris Duenas on the one-pad amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I certainly understand the desire that has been presented on both of the amendments proffered, but I think I want to make sure we're staying in the ballpark here. I need to bring Gita back into the fold here if I can. Lester, my original thought on the presentation that was put forward is that the purpose for utilizing this funding is to match the Medicaid opportunities in terms of securing that additional funding. And if I'm concerned, although these are very appropriate projects and priorities at the hospital, I'm concerned that we're moving away and we're actually turning this into an appropriations measure of the funding source as opposed to the proposed purpose to match, to realize the 15, I believe, upwards of $15 million in Medicaid. Am I on the right track here?
Mr. Carlson? Senator's request.
Thank you very much, sir. You are correct that the intention of the administration in working with Senator Rodriguez was to address the Medicaid shortfall. The amount that was identified initially in Bill 359 is $7 million. We have established that there is $8.9 million roughly available. There's been a significant mindset movement, which I'm very appreciative of, from when we began this discussion about the application of maybe more money to address the problem that we have with Medicaid. And hence the amount going from $7 to $8 million. So I think that the body is moving in the correct manner. I believe also that while the discussion on the benefit to the hospital needs to also be clarified. I mean, we're talking about Medicaid, and Ms. Archangel did provide the body with an explanation of the hospital being the recipient of about 38 to 40% of Medicaid payments, with the remainder going like to some of our very essential small businesses on island, the pharmacies and other providers that are dwindling in numbers because they can't afford the carrying cost of dispensing medication, for example, and then waiting for a while to get paid. So we have to, again, bring it back to Senator Limtiaco's comment, focus back to where we are, and I'm glad that this body is actually refocusing it to where the administration and Senator Rodriguez were to begin with. Personally, I have no problems whatsoever with tapping the entire amount of this these funds. I see the growth from $7 million to $8 million. I see the application of that through the Medicaid program, through local businesses that then pay taxes. Then we have more economic activity. I see the speaker's desire to be able to say, let's take that $895 and as was mentioned by, I believe, Senator Nicholas, let's put that into the profit center, one of the few profit centers. So if we're going to exhaust the entirety of the funds and we're still focused 90% on Medicaid and 10% on OB and the maternity ward improvements to include equipment purchases, I think that this body is heading in the right direction with respect to addressing everything holistically.
So in that case then, thank you, Madam Chair. In that case, can we get a hard number from you in terms of what the intent of the match is to realize the Medicaid revenue, so that we understand where we're working here with the balance? If that's the desire of, because I as well, I mean, if we're going to appropriate this, let's appropriate it. But what's the hard number in terms of the match? Because you cannot lose focus on the fact that we may be cutting out a whole, it might be an unintended consequence by moving this money the way we're moving right now, that we're cutting out the true intent of the legislation, and others that are counting on the revenue reimbursements for this purpose.
I'll ask Public Health, would you like to respond?
Madam Chair, if I can do a point of information.
I will go ahead and
Okay. Before we
Ashley.
have Ms. Archangel respond to the senator, I think I hear the previous speaker, I hear his concern, right? And about how I believe, and if I can clarify it for him, is that the initial amount that we have appropriated to Medicaid has actually grown by $1 million from when we first introduced this bill. And so the 895 now that Madam Speaker is proposing, that is going for a specific purpose of the OB ward, the hospital, is separate from that. What it is now is that we're not leaving any balance anymore in these trust accounts, and she's just taking that money now and putting good use to it. And so I think I hear Senator Dueñas' concern, which I would have the same concern too. But the initial intent of ensuring that the chunk of this goes to Medicaid to pay for providers like GMH and all the other providers that care for our people is still intact. So.
Okay, so I would just close my comment with this then, because he is the author of the bill, and that's I guess we'll wait until we get to the next amendment then and see, because I was looking at this in its entirety. So in terms of the balance, I want to make clear to the panel and for the record, I don't have an issue with this allocation as well. I saw a chopping away. So if we're looking at this upwards of $8 million, Madam Chair, I really understand that. we'll see what happens with the next amendment in terms of its proposal. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. On the WAMPAT amendment, are there anyone else wishing to speak? If not, I'm going to go ahead and address the author speaker WAMPAT to close.
Thank you very much again, Madam Chair. Senator, of course, from Jonia had asked the question on the possibility of using it for equipment, and I know that this is a floating number, whether it's $3 to $5 million. My understanding, at least in some discussions with others, that it might really be $3 million for the renovation and about $1 million for equipment. And normally the logic is that when you renovate, then you want to get the state-of-the-art equipment. You don't want to do it backwards. You don't want to get the state-of-the-art equipment, but then you can't. You have to configure that into the old system. So to me, that would not make any sense. I mean, but I'm not the expert, and I feel that Mr. Berga would be able to have the expert provide some recommendations. And if I remember correctly, Mr. Berger, when we went and looked at the newly renovated emergency room, one of the things you had stated was that you had a certain dollar amount, but through the negotiation with the contractor, you were able to make some savings to turn around and buy then the equipment that you need to retrofit, the room. So in this case, especially for this particular ward, when we toured the place, Dr. Shea basically showed us several rooms that, he said that just by renovating and reconfiguring this room, we could make available maybe 2 rooms, So he was being very creative in terms of just looking at small rooms, and what you've done sometimes is just putting a wall between so that you can have 2 beds there and provide some privacy for the mothers and the family. So, and so this is just like seed money to get you started, to do maybe some of these little things right now that could make available additional rooms and with some privacy there, yes, and to put in whatever, equipment you have. I know that the chairman and I were having this discussion, and everyone in here really, in terms of being very diligent in terms of finding the additional monies that we would need to do the entire renovation. But for the time being, I think that this amount definitely can, you can avail yourselves to these monies immediately because it's cash, and you can go in and do some of these, minor type renovations to increase or maximize, rather, like I used to say as a school principal, maximize full utilization of your space, because you can't build out anymore, but you're going to have to use the space within. So I hope, of course, that there would be, he's not here to hear then my answer to his question and concern, but then I hope there won't be any objection to this amendment.
Thank you for closing, Madam Speaker. On the WAMPAT amendment, all those, are there any objections? All those in favor? No. No objections? No objections? Motion carries. We will now go back to Senator Mike Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have circulated the amendment, and I'd like to address the amendment and preface its intent to kind of explain why it's structured this way. Do the members of the Guam Memorial Hospital have a copy of the amendment, Chair?
No.
Yeah. We're going to go ahead and take a minute recess, because I want to make sure that the amendment as proffered right now, that all our colleagues have a copy, and then work with legal on making sure that the amounts are right as the amendments are made.
Sure.
So 1 minute recess. From recess, Senator Mike Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Again, just some background information on the amendment I'm about to proffer. On 5 GCA, Chapter 22, subsection 22-1304, the Health Security Trust Fund, this is one of the funds that are being tapped for the purposes of this bill. And this trust fund has some very specific language that limits the money to be used exclusively for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. Now, I understand that healthcare as an overall big picture concern for this island is something that isn't limited to the Guam Memorial Hospital. But the reason why this fund is specifically for the hospital is because it was received as tobacco settlement money, and it was supposed to be providing a perpetual funding source for the hospital. What's being proposed at this time is a tapping of this trust fund to meet some of the Medicaid obligations within the Guam Memorial Hospital. But the way that the language is currently structured in the bill is that we're going to be tapping a trust fund limited exclusively to the hospital for purposes other than the hospital, to include the hospital, but for other reasons as well. But in subsection A of the Health Security Trust Fund, it specifically says, and I'll read it here into the record, there is hereby created, separate and apart from other funds of the government of Guam, a fund known as the Health Security Trust Fund. The Health Security Trust Fund shall not be commingled with the general fund and shall be kept in a separate bank account and shall be subject to legislative appropriation and expended exclusively for the purpose of funding the operations and capital expenditure at the Guam Memorial Hospital. So the language is very specific, Madam Chair. We're not supposed to tap this money for anything else other than the hospital. And so with the way that the bill is structured, we're tapping $5.5 million to go into Medicaid to be matched and then to be spent on Medicaid billings. But not 100% of that $5.5 million is going back to the hospital. Based on discussions with public health yesterday, about $2.7 million is already reconciled to go back to the hospital. A projected $5 million additional that hasn't been reconciled yet, and after reconciliation will probably go down to about $2 to $3 million, is projected to go back to the hospital. But even if 100% of the current Medicaid billings, to include those that have been reconciled and those that are pending reconciliation, if all of that was to go back to the hospital, it still would come out to that $5.5 million, which means we're tapping the trust fund and getting a zero return on investment. We're just basically taking out the capital and using it 100% for the trust fund. What I'm going to propose is an amendment that will take that $5.5 million from that trust fund, put it into the Medicaid programs that we can get the match, and earmark that $5.5 million plus its matched amount specifically for the Guam Memorial Hospital. And the reason why we want to do this is twofold. One, it'll make sure that we're in compliance with the existing law that limits those funds strictly for the benefit of the hospital. And two, we've just recently heard from the public auditor that the hospital is a going concern, which means that every single dollar that belongs to the hospital needs to generate as much of a return as we can for the hospital and needs to be used for the benefit of the hospital. So by moving forward with this amendment, what we will basically do is we'll take $5.5 million from the hospital's trust fund, get, and Tess, correct me if I'm wrong, a 50% match on the Medicaid side?
Wait, hold on. Sorry. Do you want to address that question to the panel, Senator
Please, Madam
Nicholas,
Chair.
please?
Yes,
And would you like Public Health to answer that question?
please.
Public Health, please do.
Depending on the category of the program, it could be 78.6% or 57.2%.
So the
So
low end,
for every dollar, it will generate an additional $1.34 or $3.67 for every dollar, depending on the category of the client.
Senator Nicholas?
thank you very much. So best case scenario, if we get a 3.67 return, we're looking at turning $5.5 million into $20,185,000. Worst case scenario, we're looking at taking $5.5 million and turning that into 1.34, $7,370,000. So, I mean, it's a great return for the hospital, and what I would like for us to do is to make sure that money is pegged for the hospital. All the Medicaid billings, we're going to front load you guys, every Medicaid billing that you have outstanding, everything that's still pending reconciliation, and everything that's going to come in thereafter, up to a minimum of 7.3 million or as high as 20.185 million, will have funding. That's the intent. So with that, Madam Chair, I would like to proffer this amendment. It has been circulated. It's to amend Section 2A1, and I'll go ahead and read the language into the record for the amendment. After the word however, which is on page 1, line 27 of the proposed amendment, after the word however, new language will be added that reads, that the amount of $5,500,000 as listed in subsection A and reprogrammed from the Health Security Trust Fund and any available and authorized federal matching grants in aid be solely expended for Guam Memorial Hospital Authority claims, and then the word additionally, the expenditure of a portion of the allocation from the Youth Tobacco Education and Prevention Trust Fund and the Health and Human Services Fund as listed in subsection A and pursuant to this item 1. So the amendment's been circulated, Madam Chair, and that's the rationale basically for why I'm proposing this. We're going to take from their trust fund, let's give it back to them with the full return on investment that we can get out of the Medicaid match and front load these guys so they can have as much resources as possible to get out of this going concern situation the hospital is currently in. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. On the amendment, Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. Madam Chair, I think we're losing the focus of what we're here for and what this whole initiative is about. When we first came to session and we talked about the need to access these monies, it was the critical need to ensure that the Medicaid program as a whole is provided the funds that's necessary to address a shortfall that it's experiencing today. And part of that shortfall is payments to GMH, of course. As we know, we heard about 40% is paid to GMH, to our local doctors and clinics, to our pharmacies, other medical suppliers, and even to our off-island hospitals who are treating our Medicaid patients. And so I've said, and I'll repeat it again here this morning, this afternoon, is that it's important to give these monies to Medicaid program, who then will then match it with federal funds and disperse the money as they see fit, as the priorities are before them. And GMH is a priority, no doubt. You can test that. They go over and beyond what is allocated and appropriated from this body, and using other ways to ensure that GMH is properly reimbursed for whatever claims that after reconciliation. But I ask my colleagues to please take a look at this holistically and not have tunnel vision. For a fact, Madam Chair, that I, for one, wholeheartedly support the hospital. It's just like every other of our members here do support our hospital. But in this approach, I think we have to really look at what we've talked about, is that what is happening in the hospital? Where are we hemorrhaging? It's the emergency room. The emergency room there is where we see a lot of people coming in, using it as a primary care service, which it's inefficient. It's a bad way to use the ER room, right? And so what is happening, though, is that the community health centers, the private clinics are being congested. And because they're not being paid on time, or because they're not being paid, they've opted to either suspend services or limit the amount of patients that they see into their clinics. And so what happens there is that our people then have to end up at the emergency room, because the emergency room has a mandate, the hospital has a mandate to treat and see people regardless of their ability to pay. And so the whole approach here, and what we really need to do as a community and as leaders here is look at how where the root of the problem is. We should never stop in our efforts to find funding and direct it directly to the hospital, but I think in this way we are indirectly also providing this assistance to the hospital by ensuring that these private clinics are paid, and that they those that are not seeing them are hopefully can gain the government's trust back, and open up again to these to our Medicaid beneficiaries. And so I would ask my colleagues to please look at it that way, and so I would object to this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez. Senator Chris Dueñas on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And herein lies where I was before. I guess I was a little bit premature. But this discussion, and I'm the same in this. Think the same way that the author of the bill and the chairman on health feels. I understand. I mean, if we could turn over tomorrow and write another check for $10 million or $20 million, everyone in this body would do that. The thing is that the concern brought up by the author of the bill and the chair is that we have inherent in this investment monies that are going back to the hospital. But we also have monies that are supporting the Medicaid match and Medicaid service deliverers within the community. So if you will, this is somewhat of a prevention arm as well. So this investment and this match to realize these monies is something that is really holistic in its approach. And so I certainly don't want to teeter on the fact that we don't need to take advantage of every opportunity to exhaust any opportunity to get direct cash appropriation to the hospital as much as possible. But to lose sight of the fact that we have other priorities and other obligations, if you will, that otherwise wouldn't be realized under this circumstance, I think would be short-sighted on our part. We are in the budget season. We are approaching that debate next month. We have in this body passed legislation in the last week or so and continue, and I'm sure with the governor's commitment as well, we'll continue to do what's needed on a case-by-case and every basis with regard to what the hospital needs. But I have to really concur with the author and with the chairman here that if we lose focus and we lose sight, then we could have just done this and waved that wand any time that an emergency has come up in the last 6 months, in the last year, in the last 5 years. In fact, going back to 2002, according to in terms of when the settlement monies were there, it would have been a piggy bank of sorts, if you will. But the fact of the matter is, I think it lent itself to more investment, and down the line, what it's done over the years, the subsequent public laws that were passed. But now we're here, and we may chance losing sight. So, Madam Chair, I join the author and the chairman in the objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Senator Frank Ogden.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a few questions in regards to the overall application of the Medicaid program. Ms. Archangel, if you can just respond to this first question, is of all the Medicaid that you process on an annual basis, what is the general percentage that is diverted towards taking care of obligations with GMH?
Public Health.
Would you by any chance know that?
Yes. Based on the years, around 32 to 38% goes to GMH.
So of the $7 million, you can anticipate about $3 million plus the matching requirement. So approximately $6 or $7 million.
Right.
Thank you very much. Now my next question would be applied towards GMH personnel, Madam Chair, is in anticipation of the conclusion of July, conclusion of August, and the conclusion of September, do you anticipate any requirement for immediate cash infusion for the balance of this fiscal year, above and beyond what this would provide? Let's say, for example, this provides you the $3 million cash and then the matching requirement, $6 or $7 million in payment for Medicaid. Aside from that, I'm trying to I hope you're following me with my train of thought, because the reality is we here, although we're discussing this legislation, there's a bigger issue here. is what exactly, with all the resources and all the tools that have been extended also to the chief executive through the budget, Public Law 32-68, to provide direct assistance to GMH, for the balance of this fiscal year, do you anticipate any immediate infusion of cash other than what already is provided by law?
Mr. Berger? Or Alan?
Thank you, Senator. That's a very complex question because we have funding coming from the public health programs, from the federal government, from local insurers, and from the self-pay population.
That's why the
Certainly-
question was, Mr. Aldrich, that's why the question was phrased, other than what's already provided by law and other than what would be expected by virtue of the passage of this legislation, will there be any need for an immediate infusion of cash for the balance of the fiscal year? Good example is last year. When there were some serious funds that became available to the general fund, there was a call out about we need to divert some of these resources to GMH and take care of the immediate need, and this was in the month of August, a month out from the close of the fiscal year. So I'm asking that general question. You're absolutely right, but it's a question that I'm sure that you've anticipated.
Yes, and that was my statement was just a preamble, if you will. We submit claims of about $4 million a month to public health, and we anticipate reimbursement from public health, both being Medicaid and MIP, of about $2.7 million a month. So as we look at these cash flows during the course of the year, we would anticipate, we would hope to get $2.7 million a month, whether that's for April, May, or June through the end of the year. So if in fact we are looking at 2.7 million or 3 million or whatever that 30% of the $11 million is, that we would still be, there would still be our anticipated need for public health reimbursement, but unfortunately, with the funding limits that we have with the $11 million or whatever that number finally is that it would not be adequate to cover what we really anticipate for cash flow needs from public health.
Senator Ruggan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Aldrich. I think that's extremely telling in terms of obviously something that has been captured by the media over the course of the last couple of weeks and over the course of the past many, many years, is the financial challenge that GMH continues to face on an annual basis. And I say financial challenge because right now, outside of the appropriation that has been provided to public health for Medicaid matching, that cap has already been reached. That's why we're here, entertaining the infusion of additional authorization and appropriation and hard cash to allow for the continued remittance of payments to GMH as well as the other Medicaid providers. But then listening very intently to the comments that you just shared, despite that, what we're doing today, despite the infusion of $14 million, that's based on the $25 million loan that you acquired earlier this fiscal year, despite the infusion of $14 million to take care of your vendor obligations, that by the end of this FY, realistically, GMH may still have an operational deficit. And then the question would be, it's too presumptuous to ask you exactly what that number would be, because obviously you can already estimate 2.7, if not $3 million a year to cover down on Medicaid. You already know what your anticipated collection rate is from the insurance companies, from the customers, the patients that visit GMH. You can already project that and come up with a ballpark figure. And I think it will be unjustified for me to ask you for that ballpark figure right now. But realistically, just based on your comments and based on what GMH has experienced repeatedly, that certainly this is a situation that may require additional cash infusion prior to the conclusion of the fiscal year to take care of your operational requirements. Not capital investments, not capital improvement projects, but your operational requirements. And I certainly hope that during the course of the budget process that we can at least get some semblance of what that figure may be, so that if the chief executive, the tools that are provided in the budget are transferring up to $30 million of utilizing his transfer authority of transferring up to $30 million that he may be able to identify within the executive branch budget to GMH. If that tool is not sufficient because he may need to identify additional cash, then we need to understand that also from this perspective. But I appreciate your response, and it's a very telling response, because on an annual basis you provide the financial reports, or on a quarterly basis you provide the financial reports to members of this body and to the public. And this is a challenge that certainly we as a community need to understand. We as a community need to continue to try to address, and I have to say that having been a member of this body for a few years, that this body has traditionally, to the greatest extent possible, always tried to lean forward and provide resources to GMH. And even the proposed amendment of 5.5, if it translates into an additional 5.5 plus 7, 12, $13 million, even that may not be sufficient to cover down on your operational requirements for this FY. So that certainly is a challenge, and I just want to leave it with that note. Just anticipating our discussion in August, hopefully you can have a better, you could have or share with us a ballpark figure of what you can anticipate by the end of the fiscal year, so that if we can work collaboratively with not only members of this body, the chair of health, but also the front office, we need to be able to see what we can do to provide you the resources should they be available. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Senator Franco. Then Senator Tom Matta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been just sitting back and listening to all the discussions and trying to keep it as simple as possible in my mind. And I think that when we started with this discussion here, we were taking a look at tapping this $8 million that's available, or initially it started out, I think, at $6 million, and apply it towards Medicaid, which in turn has some matching grant potentials to be able to leverage this $6 million. And essentially, I guess the leverage is that if we put up the $6 million, Medicaid will match that and provide another $8 million, increasing the total amount that will then be available up to $14 million. That was my understanding of what we're trying to do here. Now we have this amendment here, which really kind of takes saying that if we're taking the money from this fund, then it should be used for the specific purpose that fund was established for, taking a more parochial look, I guess, and use of the funds. And I think what it comes down to then is that, you know, if I had a dartboard behind me that had all the GMH needs and requirements, and I threw a dart behind me, and wherever it lands, that was going to be a valid need, and we should fund it. And the same thing with public health. If we took a dartboard and put it behind me, and I threw a dart, and wherever it lands, it was also a valid and legitimate need. And so if that was, you know, a common denominator, that basically what the mover of the amendment to the amendment is proposing, he certainly, I think, has some very legitimate and valid points. And also the public health with the Medicaid program and all that. And in my mind, in trying to keep it simple, then is a question then of where should we put the money that would give us, that would help us to maximize the leveraging potential of the local dollar that we are providing. And my understanding then is that if we were to give it as was originally intended by the amendment to public health, so that they can apply it to the Medicaid and be able to get back some federal matching from that will probably yield us a greater leveraging potential than if we were to basically then take a more parochial view and apply it primarily to Guam Memorial Hospital. But again, that's not to say that the needs of one institution is any less than the other. I think it comes down to where can we best put it to get the maximum return. And I'm a non-finance guy, talking about, as if I really understood finance. I don't, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, and that's the way I understand it. And according to my understanding, I would then follow along in objecting to the amendment that's being proffered.
Thank you, Senator Ada. Are there anyone else wishing to speak on the San Nicolas amendment? If not, Senator San Nicolas, to close. Can we get Senator San Nicolas in to close? Would you like to close or call for the vote? There has been an objection.
I'd like to close, Madam Chair.
Please do.
Okay, so we had some good dialogue. Just to reiterate some points. First of all, this $5.5 million that we're talking about is the hospital's money. It's in a fund established by public law to be used specifically for the hospital. So I'd like to go ahead and break down, if we can all sharpen our pencils, the math and how it's going to work out for the benefit of the hospital in both scenarios. Scenario number one, without the amendment, we're talking about a full $7 million times at a minimum of 1.3 times 1.34, which is the lowest matching potential that we can get at public health, times 40%, which is how much the hospital gets from the typical Medicaid allotment. We'll go 40% because we'll just go high end. 7 million times 1.34 times 40% comes to $3,752,000. So we're going to take 5.5 million from the trust fund, and worst case scenario, the hospital only get back 3.7 million. That's worst case scenario if we only get a 1.34 match. Best case scenario, if we get a 3.37 match, we'll take 5.5 million from the hospital, and they'll get back 9.4 million. That's pretty nice. That's under the current proposed bill. With the amendment, this is what the numbers look like. If we take that 5.5 mil and we get the full 1.34 match from Medicaid and specify that only for the hospital will get, worst case scenario, $7.3 million. If we take the 5.5 mil and we get the 3.37 match, best case scenario, the hospital will get $20,185,000. So we want to talk about tunnel vision or losing sight. Let's look at the numbers and let's understand something very, very important here. First of all, this is the hospital's money. Secondly, the hospital is a going concern. And third, how do we best invest this money for the benefit of the hospital because it's their money and because they're a going concern? Without the amendment, worst case scenario, the hospital is going to invest 5.5 million and get 3.7 million back. Suffer a loss. Best case scenario, they'll invest 5.5 million and get 9.4 million back under the current bill. With the amendment, worst case scenario, the hospital will invest 5.5 million and get 7.3 million back, a 50% rate of return. Even better, they'll invest 5.5 million and they'll get $20,185,000 back, a 400% rate of return. And Madam Chair, that is why I'm proffering this amendment, because this money is the hospital's money. The hospital needs the funds. The situation is dire up there, and I understand that Medicaid is a big picture and that public health's mission is big picture. And I fully support the big picture. But when we're talking specifically about tapping the trust fund of the Guam Memorial Hospital, that by law is supposed to be used exclusively for them, fiduciarily, I have a responsibility to get as much of a return on that money as possible. And while I would prefer to leave the trust alone and have some kind of perpetual asset to keep generating revenue, getting a 50% or a 400% rate of return on Medicaid matching is something that I can probably go along with, provided that every dollar that's in that trust fund goes to the hospital. And I believe that our responsibility at this juncture is to the entity that is under our authority. The hospital is still a part of this government. And while Medicaid does go to benefit all these other programs and service providers, when it comes to spending the hospital's money, and the hospital being an entity of this government, we must do what's in the best interest of the hospital. Now, I do want to clarify something. This amendment isn't going to deprive everybody else. There's still $1.5 million out there that's going to go into Medicaid for all of those other Medicaid beneficiaries, all those other Medicaid service providers. And that money can be matched. If it's matched at 1.34, they'll still get $2 million. If it's matched at 3.37, they'll still get $5 million. So with this amendment, we're not cutting anybody out entirely. What we're saying is hospital money for hospital only, and let's get them as much of a return as possible. And that only comes up to 5.5 million out of 7. So the remaining 1.5 will be for all the other Medicaid service providers. And as we move forward, we do need to continuously work to make whole on the Medicaid question, but there's something that I want to re-emphasize, Madam Chairman, and that is a statement made by the Director of Public Health himself. We talk about this Medicaid shortfall as if it's a number that we're going to eventually catch up to. But even the director himself said that Medicaid will always be short. We can fully fund Medicaid, the $295 million match that we have sitting out there, and he said he'll still spend all that money because the demand for health care will always rise to meet the availability of funds. So we can't address this issue as if we're trying to catch up on Medicaid expenses. We will never catch up on Medicaid expenses. We're going to have to continuously try to find money in order to meet the demand, but we cannot do it at the expense of further sailing a going concern over the waterfall. This is their money. We need to make sure that we get the best return that we can for that entity, for the Guam Memorial Hospital. And as we address the Medicaid question in perpetuity, we must do so mindfully of every other service provider, but when it comes to using money that's specific to the hospital, let's make sure that we're not taking their resources and giving it to others, because they need every dime, every penny, right now. I raised that issue in a session previously. Me and management, you know, it's a love-hate relationship, but we're both on the same team. We're both on the same team, and that is that we want to make sure the hospital is able to continue. And so in this scenario, in this case, I'm strongly urging my colleagues to please pass this amendment and make sure that the money that's for the hospital goes to the hospital, and that we infuse them with between $7 and $20 million worth of matching funds to go along with their $5.5 million investment. If we truly care about saving the hospital, this is the right amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nicholas. On the Mike Nicholas amendment, there was a couple of objections. So on a show of hands, all those in favor of the amendment, please do so by raising your hand. Motion fails. Senator Nicholas, you
Thank
still
you,
have
Madam
a couple
Chair.
of minutes.
I do have one more amendment since this amendment did not pass. Previously, in our previous committee of the whole yesterday, an amendment was proffered by Vice Speaker B.J. Cruz that amended Section 4 of the bill, and that amendment that he proffered that did pass required that the bond counsel clarify the legality of the proceeds spent last rule. What I would like to proffer at this time is an amendment to also request the Attorney General clarify the use of the funds with respect to 5 GCA Chapter 22, subsection 21304. Basically, I want the Attorney General to clarify this law specifically says that the money from the hospital can only be used for the hospital. So I want to make an amendment to that language so that we can clarify, is it possible for us to even take this $5.5 million from the hospital and use it elsewhere, or must it only be spent for the benefit of the hospital? So my amendment, I believe it's being circulated now, Madam Chair. Section 4 was, I believe, added as an amendment by Vice Speaker Cruz yesterday. And I was going to proffer this as an amendment to the amendment, but I was told to step back and wait until a different time. And so I believe that time is now.
Right. I just want to note for the record, Senator Nicholas, that we're working off of Senator Rodriguez's amendment. So, okay, so, right, so it would be this amendment that you're proffering right now would be to Vice Speaker Cruz's amendment on 1A.
Yes, I believe his amendment was proffered. We've been
Section
on,
4.
Yes, we've been on Senator Rodriguez's amendment.
Right,
since it
I
started.
understand.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that you clarify that, and then if there's any renumbering,
Sure.
just to make sure that you have legal counsel be given that authority.
Sure.
Okay, please proceed.
Yes, again, my amendment is to ask the Office of the Attorney General to clarify as to the legality of reprogramming an appropriation relative to the rule that was cited by Vice Speaker Cruz, as well as the provisions of subsection 22.1304, Chapter 22, Title 5 of the Guam Code annotated.
With that being said, are there anyone wanting to speak? I will go ahead and start with Senator Tom Atta and then Senator Frank Uggan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I understand what the mover of the amendment is saying. It seems, though, that we may be able to address that right here if on line 11 we were to preface the language there by saying that notwithstanding any other provisions of law, that then reprogramming and appropriation of available funds shall be made. And I mean that's the provision that we use because I mean he's right. If we go back to existing law right now, it says very specifically that you can only appropriate up to 90% of the interest that has been generated. In the case of the GMH trust, it says specifically for GMH, and unless I don't see any language in the original amendment that repeals any of that. So it seems that in order to be able then to do what this amendment is, the original amendment is wanting to do, is that we would need to put language in there that says notwithstanding any other provision of law. And this is probably where maybe legal counsel needs to provide advice on this so that we can just nip it in the bud right here.
You know what? I'm going to take a minute recess. Back from recess. Senator Tom Matt, I'm going to recognize you again on your statement.
Yes, Madam Chair. I did not make a motion.
Right, I know.
I was just stating my understanding of how we might be able to address the concern. So with that, I'll stand down and we'll let the process take its course on this amendment, and then I will come back on the original amendment.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Adam. So next to speak would be Senator Frank Uggan. You're not here. Senator Dennis Rodriguez, I'll go ahead and recognize you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I like the idea of Senator Adams' suggestion of just to nip this in the bud, is that we put that notwithstanding provision. However, I don't necessarily think, I think it's good to do it. I don't think it's necessary. Is that because we are reprogramming the use of these funds now. And so this law, if it becomes law, would trump the previous law. And also we have set, precedence has been set already in that funds from these, proceeds from these funds have already been used in the past. A big portion of it has went to GMH in 2011, and then also to other areas of our government. And so if the mover of the amendment would reconsider and just include that notwithstanding, I think that would be the best way to take.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator San Nicolas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I kind of see where things are going. It looks like that notwithstanding provision is going to be put in place. The reason I wanted to add this language is because I'm trying to preserve this trust fund. If that notwithstanding language is going to be proffered and passed, I wouldn't want to include this language because then it'll just be creating an undue delay. So what I would like to do at this time is I will withdraw the amendment and yield to anyone who is going to make that notwithstanding amendment. And if that notwithstanding amendment passes, then I'll just go ahead and not introduce this amendment in the interest of saving everybody some grief. However, if that notwithstanding amendment fails, I would like the chair to consider allowing me to reconsider introducing this amendment.
So at this time, Senator San Nicolas, you must give me an answer. Will you withdraw this?
I would like to withdraw it if someone's going to introduce a notwithstanding amendment.
Yes? Okay. Are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries. Anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? If not, on the Rodriguez amendment now. We've exhausted all the names to speak, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Senator Rodriguez to close and reaffirm, because when you first opened, Senator Rodriguez, you presented a substitute on Section 2, and we've been working as a body on that, and we've had the body speak on it. So I'll have you close on the amendment.
Thank you very
Wait,
much.
do you have a point of information, Speaker Wampat?
I'm sorry, I was trying to kind of keep track of where the discussion was going, because my understanding is that you have now the notwithstanding provision here.
Senator Rodriguez, as chair, affirmed that he would do the notwithstanding provision.
Okay.
So
And
that's why
so-
I'm back to him, and everybody else has spoken on the amendment.
Okay, and then the other question I think that needs to be cleared, maybe Mr. Carlson might be able to answer this, is that.
So
oh,
that
there
would
are
be a
two
point
things.
of inquiry, Madam
Okay,
Speaker.
yes, and what that would be, of course, is that we have taken now every penny, down to the penny, 77 cents that's left, out of these three accounts. Now, will then these accounts close, or is there an anticipation, in the future somewhere, that maybe some money can start to trickle back in again from this tobacco lawsuit?
Gita?
The accounts will probably close. The UOG and the GCC accounts, which were not part of this discussion, will remain. If there was any future funding from tobacco or any other source of funds, that the body wished to restore this endowment fund for primarily the hospital, since that's the center of discussion, then that would be the prerogative of the body, no problem.
Okay, and Madam Chair, the reason why I asked the question then, because one of two things is that if this, since these accounts then will be empty, it'll be the decision of the body, of course, is to repeal then these legislations that created these funding sources and the trust funds for every single one of these. And then in anticipation that should there be any new monies coming in, then the creation of the same or different, legislation as well, or trust funds, to address any future monies should it, they come in.
So yes, if I understand you correctly, if the notwithstanding clause is used, that would allow for the statute to still be enforced should it be later on funded. I believe your thought process is correct in that manner.
Yes, and that's the only reason I'm posing this as well for the body, to consider as well for, the future. Thank you.
Si Diyos Masi, Speaker Wampat, Senator Rodriguez on the close.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, before I close, I'd like to proffer the amendment of including the notwithstanding provision that was talked about, and have a legal counsel incorporate that language where he sees fit, to ensure that what the intention was here is carried out.
On that motion, without any objections, motion carries. Senator Rodriguez, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to first thank our government officials for being here. Lester from GIDA, Antoinette, who was here, Tess, of course, and Jim and Joe and Nada. Thank you very much for your time here, and also for the others who were out in the public hearing room from the NCD Consortium. I also want to thank sincerely, Madam Chairs, our colleagues in here who have really made this bill a better bill, a bill that would address a critical need for our Medicaid program, but taking a look at it, really a critical need for the people of Guam, even if you're not a Medicaid recipient, because the domino effect that happens here when we don't care for our individuals, our brothers and sisters who are part of the public assistance program, it trickles down. The impacts and effects are felt throughout the community. And so I want to thank them for their participation. And also, I have to thank the governor as well for calling us into special session, for seeing the urgency, and for having his team work closely with me in pushing this, in moving this forward. I think some of the discussions here have been very telling. I mean, a lot of them I've really grown to appreciate. I mean, from not wanting to provide even a single penny to our hospital a few days ago to today wanting to ensure that we have money to go into the hospital. So I'm very pleased about that, and I think you guys should be very pleased about that as well. And so in closing again, I just want to ask my colleagues to support this measure as we vote on it later on today, and look at the bigger picture, which is to ensure that the Medicaid program is funded through this fiscal year. I think if there's any efforts in wanting to see us spend less public resources on healthcare, then maybe we need to take a look at the program. Take a look at the program. If you want us, if you're going to say that, we're going to keep on, we have money, you're going to keep on spending on the program, well, take a look at the program and see from what areas now you want to start cutting, what services you want to start cutting, and that's how you're going to see. That's one way of approaching it, to saying we're going to stop at spending all this money on healthcare. The other approach, Madam Chair, is what we've addressed in this measure here, which is to start looking at the behaviors, the health behaviors of our beneficiaries who are on Medicaid, and see how we can turn the tide. A simple requirement, incentive of saying, you're a Medicaid patient, you must get annual checkup every year. That's something that goes a long way, because we know a lot of them don't even do that. And so this bill touches upon that. And so again, I want to sincerely thank my colleagues in here for making this bill what it is today. And again, I think you mentioned it, but just to reaffirm that, yes, when I had introduced this amendment, I had moved that it be accepted, and that that's what we were discussing. So thank you again, Madam Chair. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, and I forgot. Thank you for that. But I wanted to ask to include Senator Frank Uggan as my number 2 sponsor, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Tina Muñoz Barnes, Senator Alinia Machita, of course, the Vice Chair, Senator Tony Ada, Speaker Juan Pat as well, and all the others to be co-sponsors of this measure.
On that motion, with the notwithstanding provision, on the notwithstanding provision, that passed already? On the motion, on the amendment that you proffered, on the substituted and the main amendment that we were working on, with all the amendments intact from 1 through A through K? A through K. Are there any objections? If there are no objections, motion carries. And then on the sponsorship, are there any objections? No objection, motion carries. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, I'm going to go ahead and, on the main motion. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized. No, we're on the main, the bill with all the amendments in place. It's 120. I will allow Senator Nicholas on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I believe at this time, with some of the comments made by the retiring speaker, some clarification needs to be made with respect to the position that I hold as far as funding goes for the hospital. I absolutely support the hospital. I believe that now that we are in this situation where we have a going concern, we need to work hard with management and analyze every single expenditure and make sure that we're getting the return that's going to get us out of this going concern situation. And we're going to have a situation where we're going to lock horns repeatedly until we find out what the best middle ground is going to be. And I'm committed to working with management in order to get there. I'm very uncomfortable now with the direction that the bill is taking, because at this juncture, what we are doing is we are raiding one of the last remaining cash assets of the hospital to the tune of $5.5 million with no actual guarantee that they're going to get even that full amount back. With the math that I broke down earlier, their $5.5 million can come back at $3.7 million, and they'll lose money. They could possibly double up on that $5.5 million, but there's no guarantee that once that money leaves their trust fund and goes into the Medicaid matching program, that they're going to get that back. There really is no guarantee. For all intents and purposes, that money can go into the Medicaid matching program and be spent everywhere else but the hospital. And so we're operating on a lot of good faith here. And in a going concern, I don't like swimming in a current of good faith. I would much rather prefer that the hospital, now that you're aware that you have this trust fund, perhaps consult with Gita and find out maybe there's other areas where you would rather invest this money. Would you rather, we talked about the maternity ward, and people have talked about touring that ward, and I heard the number $4 million get tossed out. Will it cost $4 million to renovate and fully get that maternity ward up to everybody's satisfaction? Maybe that $5.5 million would be better spent on a maternity ward. That $5.5 million is your money. And I'm very uncomfortable now that we're moving a bill forward that's going to take $5.5 million from your trust fund, given the current situation of the hospital, put it into Medicaid, and then see where it goes from there. The Director of Public Health made it very clear we could throw mountains of money into Medicaid, and we will spend it. So the underlying question becomes, are we solving the problem? Now, of course, there's multiple problems that we're talking about. One of them is the problem of healthcare in general, and of course it is. But for me, when it comes to using the hospital's money, the question becomes, are we helping the hospital to solve its financial problem? And that question can only be answered with a yes if every dollar that's going into Medicaid from the hospital is going back to the hospital with the matching to meet the Medicaid needs of the hospital. I remember Director Verga was talking about the 3 M's, Medicaid, Medicare, and MIP. So by front-loading this Medicaid, as was originally proposed in the amendment, we would have loaded you guys up with a ton of Medicaid money. Now, we're going to hope that money's going to come back to you guys from public health that you put in. I'm very, very concerned about this, Madam Chair. I'm very, very concerned about this. Public health has already made it very clear that they've only reconciled 2.7 million. So if there's all of these receipts that are already waiting to be paid, and we need that 5.5 million to pay it, and only 2.7 million is reconciled for GMH, does that mean that we can only be assured that they're going to take out 5.5 million from GMH and only get 2.7 million back? And we're going to cross our fingers that it might be the full 5.5? You guys can just take that out of your trust fund now and use it to pay your bills. All you need to do is ask for the appropriation. But now what we're creating is this whole hoops and ladders thing where we're going to try and filter through the Medicaid program and hope it eventually makes it back to your bottom line. And that concerns me. I love the idea of being able to get Medicaid matching funds. It's always attractive. But if it's coming from the general fund, if it's coming from an appropriation from this legislature, that's one thing. But if it's coming from your trust fund, that's entirely something else. So, Madam Chair, as much as there's a lot of good things in this bill, I'm committed to making sure the hospital has every resource it needs. I'm committed to making sure that we're going to protect the hospital. And I'm committed to making sure that this trust fund goes fully to the benefit of the hospital. So I'm going to register my no vote for this bill and my objection to this bill, and we'll see where the vote goes. I want these trust funds to remain intact. I want these monies to be spent at the highest and best use for the hospital, and I'm very concerned that we're raiding a trust fund and we're not ensuring that the full benefit of that raid is going to be actually going to the very source that needs it so badly. I mean, imagine, Madam Chair, imagine if we raided the retirement fund to go fund something else, and with all this promise of all this matching money and all these benefits for all these other people, but we weren't going to guarantee the retirement fund was going to get 100% of the money back. The hospital belongs to the people, just like the retirement fund belongs to the retirees and the people of Guam. And as much as we have historically been militant about protecting those funds that are for retirement, for the retirement fund, we must be equally militant in protecting the funds that are earmarked specifically for GMH, and this trust fund is one of them. So unless we're going to have some kind of guarantee that this Medicaid money and every penny that it's matched with is going to go back to GMH, I'm uncomfortable with tapping this trust fund at all. It's one of the few assets that it has left, and as the situation grows more intense with the opening of a new hospital, they're going to need every single penny that they have to call their own. So that's basically where I'm at with this, Madam Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity.
Sinamasi, Senator San Nicolas. Senator Chris Duane is recognized on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I certainly understand the concerns raised by the retiring speaker. However, I think, and I'm going to rely on the chairman, GIDA, public health representatives, and others to account for the veracity of the statements made in terms of what the final analysis will be on numbers. I know the retiring speaker is a finance major and is very skilled with numbers. But I'm going to say that just in my not only cursory but more in-depth review of the bill as proffered, even just to read the excerpt of the legislative intent, Madam Chair, the dire fiscal situation of the Medicaid program is exacerbating the burden being imposed upon the Guam Memorial Hospital and throughout an already limited pool of private healthcare providers who accept Medicaid patients. We are not, Madam Chair, speaking to an isolated situation here. We are not acting as though we're recklessly going in and raiding a trust fund for frivolous programs. These are the same patients. This is the same pool of individuals who would otherwise use the hospital. I think Mr. Ulrich and Mr. Verga could document in a few minutes here how far $8 million would go, or $7 million would go, in the grand scheme and the picture of what the hospital requires on an annual basis. I think that speaker after speaker after speaker on this floor has made it clear that we are not going to let the hospital down. That it has been demonstrated over and over and over again that this body rises to the occasion, and to assume that the rate of return is less than, and as I said, I think the chairman will and those who would end up possibly signing this bill will speak to the numbers and break it down. But to simply state that, make that statement is not consistent, Madam Chair, with the intent of this bill. And I'm going to count on public health, and I'm going to count on the professionals who have supported this legislation to spend the next few days disseminating the information of the true impact of this investment. Madam Chair, I basically will close, and maybe this will be an opportunity for a short minute for the panel, a couple members of the panel to comment, because the rate of return that was discussed earlier is predicated. It's predicated on a formula. It's not like saying tomorrow morning, Madam Chair, I'm going to go to Bank of Guam and deposit $1 million, and they say they pay 4%. And if I lock that into a TCD, I know what that money is going to be in the end of the day. Because that's FDIC backed up, insured, and that's a bank signing that note. But the return to the hospital is not guaranteed at $20 million. Based on this $5.5 million, that amendment that didn't pass. I mean, I think that the folks in here have a little bit more common sense than to throw that away. So if I can, in my closing, Madam Chair, perhaps ask for that latitude. I think the chairman might ask for it as well, so that we're clear on what we're voting on. Because I would be inclined to vote no too if that were the based formula. But I don't think it's based on that, and I want to make sure our information is clear on this floor, because we all got to vote on this bill. But I want to make sure it's abundantly clear, because I don't want the hospital officials walking away here too thinking we just left $20 million on the table. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I'll rely on that information as the days come forward, but I think it's imperative that we get a comment on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Duenas, I'm going to go ahead and accept the question and allow Public Health to briefly speak on it, and then invite GMH if they so choose. So at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In behalf of Department of Public Health and Social Services, I just want to state that Guam Memorial Hospital is an agency. It's an income generating. Public health, Medicaid, it's not. But you can consider it as income generating, because for every dollar that you appropriate to Medicaid program, it has an immediate return of 1.34. For every dollar, it has an immediate return of $1.34 or $3.67. For every dollar that we provide or that we pay our providers, that's what we get. GMH doesn't pay taxes. all other providers pay taxes. If we do pay all these providers, that money that we pay to these providers will go back into the economy. And it will infuse this money, this additional 8 million into the economy. Giving it to Guam Memorial Hospital alone will not solve the problem. As I would just want to correct what our director stated. The 221 million that's remaining of the ACA is just sitting there. If you're going to give that 8 million directly to GMH, that's only 8 million. If you give that to Medicaid, it will be double or triple. That's what I'm trying to say. This 221 million that's sitting there waiting for us to draw down is still there. So if you're going to appropriate that particular money and give it all to all our providers, the return is more than just giving it all to Guam Memorial Hospital, because these providers pay taxes also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'm coming from the perspective of prevention work. We're here because we see discrepancy. We're paying these millions of dollars for healthcare costs. Here you are allowing us to spend 1 million for prevention work. I believe that this is the first time I ever heard the legislature do a very sensible bill to promote prevention work, and it's about time. It's about time. So I appeal to you. Now, right now we're hurting because we lost a very good senator. People in Guam are dying. If we don't act now to do prevention work, we see more people dying. Our kids are unhealthy. And I'm telling you right now, we see people dying almost on a daily basis of chronic diseases. We can prevent those deaths by doing prevention work. So I appeal to everyone here. That $1 million that you give us will show to you that it will make a difference in our community.
Thank you.
I thank you for that trust that you give public health, my bureau, as long as I have all those gentlemen outside to work with me, the NCD Consortium, we will give you our best to make this program work, because I believe that prevention works. And thank you, Senator Rodriguez. This is, in my life, in my work with public health, this is the first time I ever heard the government spending money for prevention work. And we will show you that this is going to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Duenas, you still have the floor.
Yes, Madam Chair. I didn't want to engage in a debate, and I don't know that this will end up this way. I will close in speaking, but if there's going to be a volley here, I
No, it
certainly
won't
would
be.
ask for the opportunity. But
In the interest of
I will
time.
close then, Madam Speaker, in full support of the motion as proffered and for the very statements that I made. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to go ahead and, Vice Speaker?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to enter into the debate about whether or not this legislature has or has not in the past tried to do anything about prevention, and whether or not this is the first effort by this legislature or any past legislature to do it. What I am concerned, Madam Speaker, is though I am satisfied that I got my amendment onto the bill, I proffered that amendment because I am really, really concerned about the email that we received or was received by Gita from Orwick. And so I'm happy that they're going to have the certification that there's no tax implications. I'm happy that they think that they can work with it. It's now in the bill, and so that part I am satisfied with. But I join the senator from Talafofo and Dedido that my first question when I asked was whether or not these endowment funds should be used for investment in capital investment. And many of us went to the hospital and were addressed by both of these gentlemen and Dr. Shea about the fact that we need to renovate the labor and delivery room. And Madam Chair, you've spoken to me about your concern about the fact that the hospital is alleged to be outsourcing many of its income-producing services. And my understanding from the presentation that was given by Dr. Shea the day that I went to the hospital was that the labor and delivery is one of its biggest money makers up there. They deliver, 300 children a month or something like that. And that there is a need to address that room, that section of the hospital. And the request at that point was $5 million. And coincidentally, that is the amount of money that we're taking out of the endowment to make this, to pay to Medicaid. And it's not that I'm opposed to Medicaid either, because Tess knows that she has to suffer me every year about asking how much more money is needed for Medicaid so that this legislature can appropriate an adequate amount. But it just would seem to me that something that was in the endowment, if we could have used that to renovate the labor and delivery room, and as my understanding that the GMH nurses in obstetrics and gynecology are absolutely top notch, that even Naval Hospital sends their patients down to GMH because of how excellent the neonatal care is at the hospital. And if that can be a money-making endeavor, I understand from the presentation that there was one medevac from Naval Hospital that cost them $250,000. And a similar case was actually addressed by Dr. Shea and the excellent staff in the neonatal and in the obstetric section of the hospital. If that could be the moneymaker up there to keep this hospital afloat, that would be a much better use of it. Because as I read I've read and reread, and I tried to get an explanation of the Orwick email, and tried to get clarification that there was not, as mentioned in paragraph 2, that though the non-AMT investment rule is very strict and can result in taxability if not complied with, that I guess we're not going to have to face any tax liability. I'm hoping that we can get that, since it's been the move of this body to do this. But I'm also concerned about the fact that in the third paragraph that I had Mr. Carlson read, when I asked about the last spent rule, the spent last rule, it says proceeds are not considered spent on working capital unless Guam is in a deficit position. And I don't want to belabor that point. I just wanted that made clear. But we really need to be able to get this hospital to have a money-making section. And if it's labor and delivery, then that's what. But I'm hoping that the provisions that I stuck into the bill that require the certification by bond counsel will be sufficient and may actually have some effect on whether or not we go forward with this. But I too join in having predilections, if not absolute concerns, about the use of endowment investment money for operating capital as opposed to investment in capital improvements. With that, I thank you very much for allowing me to close.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? If not, I'm going to recognize the author to close on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Madam Chair, once we close, what was the procedure now?
I will go ahead and address the Assistant Majority Leader to do the technical amendments to.
Okay. Thank you again, Madam Chair, and to our colleagues again for your participation in this measure. Just some of the points that I wish to raise. I know that the good Vice Speaker had proffered his amendment, which we passed. We had also circulated another email that Mr. Carlson provided, which was to the Bond Council, which he had provided Bond Council a copy of the amendment, and so the response was that there was no problem with it, and that they would. My discussions with Mr. Carlson is that they would comply with this in whatever they needed to do. It just may be a little burden for us, but nevertheless, it's something passed, and I think it's important to ensure that that this could be done. Even though we know that in the past we had used funds from these sources as well for non-working capital expenses. And so, again, not to take any more time, Madam Chair, I'd just like to again thank the colleagues and really ask all my colleagues to positively consider this measure, as it takes a holistic approach to address the healthcare needs, more specifically the Medicaid needs of our community, which indirectly, I've said, it benefits the hospital as well. So thank you again, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez. At this time, I'll recognize the acting majority leader, Senator Tom Matta. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to rise from the Committee of the Whole with the recommendation to place Bill number 17S with all the amendments intact on to the third reading file and with a recommendation to do pass.
On the motion to rise from the Committee of the Whole with the recommendation to place Bill number 17S with all recommendations intact on the third reading file and with the recommendations to do pass without any objection.
Objection.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call for a 1-minute recess. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, we're back from recess, and I'm going to go,
Point of information?
yeah,
Point of inquiry, Madam.
I'm going to go ahead and address Senator Rodriguez for a point of information.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, before we move on, I would like to just make an amendment, make a motion to allow legal counsel. I know we do this in the beginning, but we forgot to do it. But allow legal counsel to make any technical amendments that are needed to the bill once it's passed.
As it relates even to the numbers.
As it relates also to the numbers, yes, because there was
Several amendments.
There were several amendments, and also to make sure that on the accounts that were referenced, that the proper numbers are reflected on that. Okay.
On that motion, without any objection, motion carries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are on the objection. I will call for the votes. All those, there was an objection to rising out of committee with all amendments intact. I'm going to do, there was a motion to place Bill 17S with all the amendments intact on the third reading file with the recommendations to do pass. There was an objection based on legal counsel. I will call for the votes right now. All those in favor of rising out of the committee of the whole with the recommendation to place Bill 17S with all the amendments intact on third reading file. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion passes. We're going to go ahead and take a brief recess, but thank the panel members for being here, and we will go ahead and release them now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
open session. Mr. Assistant Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on the matter of Bill number 17-S, I wish to report back that the Committee of the Whole's recommendation to place Bill number 17-S as amended by the Committee of the Whole on the third reading file and to do pass.
On that motion, no objections, so ordered. Senator?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding the,
So,
No.
so then, basically is that we have it now in the third reading, and so we'll
we're going to recess until
5:30
5 o'clock? 5:30.
to vote.
Yeah, so I move that we
5
recess
o'clock?
till 5:30.
Okay, 5 o'clock then. Okay. 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Okay, so we will then recess until 5 o'clock. We will have an engrossed bill and be ready to vote. So 5 o'clock, everyone. Recess.